So welcome everybody. This is our second DCD Discover Dialogues. And we started this program to try to highlight some of the dance studies work that is going on in the country right now. New books being written, new research happening. We just wanted to create a kind of forum where we could talk about these things. So I'm very delighted today that our guest is Sebastián Oreamuno, who also has a history with DCD because he helped us set up our traveling educate program many years ago, but he's also been a great supporter. So before we begin and I formally introduce Sebastián, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge where we are and where we're working in Toronto or Toronto. The land on which we are currently working, which is at the corner of College and Yonge, or Carleton and Yonge Street in downtown Toronto, is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It has been a site of human activity, including dance, for at least 15,000 years. And we are grateful to all the caretakers, both recorded and unrecorded, of this land and of Turtle Island. And today, the meeting place of Toronto or Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work and dance in the community and on this territory. And I just wanted to introduce Sebastián more formally than just me saying he used to work with us. But Sebastián was born in Santiago, Chile, and he is a queer Toronto-based artist and academic currently pursuing his PhD in dance studies at York University. His doctoral research explores the relationship between memory, placemaking, and cueca, the Chilean national dance. Other interests of his include the participatory body, popular culture, men and pointe, and multimedia artistic practices. He has performed and danced for Aria Evans, Noémie Lafrance, and Sashar Zarif. So welcome, Sebastián, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here and just to have a chat. And I was saying to Sebastián that I feel like we should have ice cream, because usually when he and I get together to talk about research, it's often over ice cream.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I will just say that what isn't in my bio is that when I was born in Santiago, that's true, and that's on Mapuche territory. And I didn't really get to actually learn much about the Mapuche when I lived in Chile. And I've been sort of like going back as part of my research on cueca is to understand the Indigenous and Africanist influences in the dance form. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other is that I grew up in Squamish, BC, or Squamish, BC, which is unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, and they're part of the Coast Salish Confederacy. So a leading scholar that I have been very much inspired by and influenced by is Lee Margo, who's also Coast Salish, and has sort of allowed me to understand my place in Canada. And I really appreciate her literature for that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, her work is wonderful. Great. So Sebastián, as I mentioned, I uploaded a number of images that you shared with me to DCD Discover. Would you like me to share that screen now, or shall we chat about other things first? What's best?
Whatever you want. I'll follow your lead.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then I'll do that. I'll share my screen here. Okay. And I can just introduce DCD Discover to people who may not be that familiar with it.
Great.
So you can see here, so DCD Discover is a new platform that is allowing us to share more of our collection, but it kind of goes beyond that because it also creates a portal for both artists and arts organizations and other heritage organizations to share their dance materials. So I invite everyone to go in and explore There is still a lot to add, but there are also many wonderful things here. And we've had some partner organizations like the Ottawa Jewish Archives and Karen Jameson's dance company in Vancouver, who have been using it to add their archival materials. So it does go beyond what's in the Dance Collection DOS collection. So I have uploaded these individual images, but the other thing that's easy to do with DCD Discover is create collections. And so a number of these are collections that have been put up here by other artists who are sort of testing things out. But you can see that we've added all of the Dance in Canada magazines, for example, and the Ottawa Jewish Archives has its collection up here. So I created a collection for Sebastian's materials, which must be on page 2. So we have it. So these are the collections for today. And then Sebastian, you had uploaded a couple of images previous to this when we were still in the testing phase of things. So we can bring that up too if you want to show it. I find your research really interesting because for one, I'm always keen to explore the intersections between politics and dance, because I've never believed that dance is just some frill activity that's just, beautiful and doesn't necessarily sort of contribute deeper, serious to issues in our society. Because if it was so frivolous and a frill, then why would governments ban it? It has a history of being banned in various places around the world at different points in time. If it wasn't so political, why wouldn't certain countries nationalize dances, right? Like Mao did, for example, or Pinochet, as we're about to chat about. So dive in, tell us about your research, and let me know if you want me to bring up a specific image here.
Sure. Yeah, so I totally agree with you with respect to dances being political. I mean, aside from the fact that there are bodies that are being presented on stages or, that are being presented for a community, there's so much that makes dance political. And like you said, the nationalization of a dance is one of those things. I think I will start by saying that the cueca, and I'll spell it out in the chat so that people can, I only have access to. So
right.
cueca is spelled C-U-E-C-A. It just might make it easier for people to follow if I show the word, but that's okay. It was nationalized by Pinochet in 1979, so 6 years after the coup. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, 6 years after the coup. And what I find really interesting about the nationalization of this dance is that it followed protest dance that was performed in 1978 by women so it was on March 8th, 1978, a group of women whose husbands had been made disappeared and or detained, as well as like sons and other men relatives had been made disappeared and detained. They danced what is known as La Cueca Sola, or the solitary cueca, at a stadium, and as a way to protest the dictatorship and the human rights violations that were happening during those first 6 years and that continued on afterwards during Pinochet's dictatorship.
Right. So maybe we should just back up for one second, just so people understand the political history in Chile at that time and the coup that happened. People may not be aware of that and the timing of it and so on.
Sure. So in 1973, Salvador Allende stepped in as the new president of Chile, and he was part of the Popular Unity government, which was a leftist, socialist, Marxist government. I have a hard time calling it Marxist, although they were influenced by Marxism, because I feel that sometimes it's misunderstood, that term, but it was definitely socialist, and they really wanted to spread the wealth that was being accumulated by the elites in Chile. And they were doing things that people didn't like, especially in the, like, people who were in different industries, specifically transnational companies did not like what Allende was doing, which was taking back the mines that other countries had invested in Chile, and making them national, and therefore not paying them out to, like, the States, for example, or Canada. And so he did a lot of stuff that a lot of people who were very wealthy did not like, and including actually I will say including, like, my grandmother. I remember her talking about how the coup was actually a good thing at first, because it kind of disrupted this spread of wealth that wasn't, she didn't think it was being done in a good way. And that was her perspective. As I researched more about it, I think that it was definitely a shock for Chile, and people didn't know how to contend with that shock. And so there was resistance. And because of that, in September 11th, 1973, the armed forces, created a coup, or there was a coup led by the armed forces, and Allende was overthrown. And he was actually even asked, like, given the opportunity to flee, and he didn't. He stood in the Palace La Moneda, which is the presidential house, and fought, and became basically a martyr for Chile and for socialist ideology. And then from there, General Augusto Pinochet stepped in to become a dictator in Chile, which wasn't the first dictatorship in South America, but it was the first time, or maybe it wasn't the first time that it had happened in Chile either. I'm not 100% sure, but it definitely had very devastating consequences for the Chilean population, especially those who were workers in unions and who were of leftist ideologies. Many of them had to flee as political exiles. Canada taking up many of them, but they also fled to Argentina and the US and any countries, or to any countries whose consulate in Chile or in Santiago would take people in. And then from then, there were many human rights violations. There were torture centers and concentration camps. And one of a very well-known new song movement musician, Victor Jara, was taken into a torture center, and he was a musician. He played the guitar. His hands were broken, and then he was tortured and murdered. And that was sort of to create a statement that we will no longer have this kind of ideology. And actually from then on, there were lots of things that were done to kind of disrupt, and destroy the leftist ideology, such as burning up books, and the banning of certain practices, which is really fascinating, because I haven't yet found what it is that made Pinochet want to bring cueca into or nationalize it, aside from perhaps the fact that he was building a new narrative for Chile, a narrative of, the narrative was meant to unify the country, and he made the peasant, particularly the Huaso, and that's spelled Huaso, which is also known, like, if I was going to translate or interpret it into English, is kind of like a cowboy. He made the Huaso figure unifying figure for the Chilean population. So he actually took it away from the worker and put it on, like, the peasant or farmer as, like, an image that would kind of unite the country. And the guaso is very much connected to cueca. And so perhaps this is part of like the, nationalization of a lot of folk practices, because cueca is also known as a folk dance. Although I will say that I myself perceive it uh, or feel that it's not just folk, it's popular dance form. It's a social dance form. There are traditional versions of it, but there are also regional versions. So each part of the country will have their own version of cueca. It's used for entertainment. It's meant for celebration, but it's also, like I mentioned, meant for protest. And so on March 8th, 1978, when these women danced the solitary cueca, it must have done something. I feel, again, there's no connection between this and the nationalization of the dance, but it was a year later that the cueca became nationalized. And so what these women did was they took this popular dance form and they danced it alone to make visible the absence of their loved ones. And that was a huge statement, because I think that many of this group of women, which were part of a larger group, Agrupación de Familiares de Detenidos y Desaparecidos. So that's like a group of family members of detained and disappeared peoples. They had been fighting to get, and many exiles were fighting to get information out about what was happening to these people that were being detained and made disappeared, and nothing was coming out of the Pinochet's government. Actually, even the UN tried to intervene, and actually was supposed to come to Chile, and then Pinochet, like there was like 3 members of the UN that were supposed to come to Santiago to investigate or just to see what was happening. And right before they were meant to fly out, Pinochet said no and didn't allow them in. And then slowly people were given access to come into the country, and people started to see for themselves what had been going, even though it was kept like a huge secret, because these detention centers were outside of the city, or if they were in the city, they were in a very obscured places.
Right. So what are you finding in terms of cueca's presence here in Toronto?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really interesting to figure out if cueca was, first of all, danced in Toronto, and where, and second of all, where it might have been danced. So I've been going to the archives at CERLAC, which is the Center for Research in Latin America and the Caribbean, and they have a lot of information on those 2 geographical areas. And so they have this huge collection from the Chilean exiles that came to Canada, actually from all across the country. So many Chilean exiles settled in Toronto, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Montreal. I think those seem to be the 4 main cities. Yes, the 4 main cities. And so I've been going through this bulletin that the Chilean exiles created here in Toronto to inform the Canadian, particularly like the Torontonians, but also the broader Canadian public about what was happening in Chile and why they had to flee. And so I've been reading a lot about, like their interventions, or like seeing how they like the kind of news that they were putting out there. And a lot of it is photocopies or photocopies of like news clips from other newspapers from around the globe, particularly with like Spain is siding with Chile, so they put it, they add that to their bulletin. So I've been going through these bulletins, and I was hoping to find information on cueca. And the first thing that I found, it's actually, Amy, it's on that second to last row, second from the right. That one. So I was looking through, and there wasn't much that was referencing dance, honestly, and cueca until I found this. So if you go to the bottom of that page, there's a program here that was being held at the First Unitarian Church on St. Clair West. And the program says that there's going to be folk groups grupos folclóricos, and folk music groups, or I guess they translated folk music groups, as well as poems, presented. But this image here is an image of a huaso, which is the cowboy, the Chilean cowboy, wearing a poncho and that flat hat. And he's holding here a pañuelo, or a handkerchief. And when I saw this, whether they danced cueca or not at the First Unitarian Church on this evening or not, it to me is sort of irrelevant, because this symbol is a huaso dancing cueca. Mm-hmm. Right. So there is something about this image that, made me, that was like very inspiring. I was like, okay, I have to continue looking through these bulletins, because eventually things will sort of appear. And this is just a little like advertisement at the bottom of a page that actually has news on world events, particularly with respect to Chile.
Yes. Yeah, you can see here like about victims of torture and violation of human rights and that kind of thing.
Exactly. So when I saw that, I was just kind of like inspired to keep looking further, and that was really interesting for me, because it made me realize that dance isn't super explicit, although it might be used as a way to get an audience, especially if you're trying to do resistance work. You would want to attract people with something that, might, entertain them. Right? Mm-hmm. You want to entertain them if you're going to inform them about something. And so you see this little image here in the third one from the right again. Yeah. Again, they're using the same image. A big party, September 17th. So September 18th is actually Chilean Independence Day, First Unitarian Church. Again, you see the huaso symbol with the handkerchief, as if he's dancing a cueca. So that partner of the huaso, because like I said, it's a social dance, is called a china, and she would be wearing a floral dress, and she'd also have a handkerchief. And actually, the images that I posted before when I did the live lab with Jen was of these two different types of pañuelos, or handkerchiefs, that were very gendered. So the women has this kind of frilly one, and the men's pañuelo is much more simple.
If I go back, I can actually.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can show it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I see. Yes. Yeah. Clear difference. Yeah.
Yeah, a huge difference. This isn't always the case, but oftentimes in competition. So cueca also became a competition type of dance form, because it became codified. You would have a guy using this version of the pañuelo, and a woman usually with a frilly one, right, with the frills. But I actually, in my practice, I use both, because they both have different textures. They both provoke or offer different movements. And so I've started to understand the pañuelo as a partner in the dance form, because you have to do certain movements. If it's not that, like, I don't do this in my own practice, but one of the main movements of the guy for the men is the lasso. So it's like a cowboy doing a lasso, and the women do a much more, it feels more like flamenco-y, kind of like wrist movement with the pañuelo, and it's not as vigorous, or they'll just hold it up. And that's sort of what the women dancing the solitary cueca, there's videos of it, they would just hold their pañuelo up and not really move their wrist, and they would do this sort of simplified version of cueca. So again, cueca is a very flexible dance form. You can take elements of it and kind of create something for your own intentions.
What's really interesting to me, Sebastian, when I look at this image, the graphic style of it is kind of similar to some of the other research that you found, but also I feel like I see it in the images that you've created that are behind you right now. So maybe you could chat a bit about that connection.
Yeah, so I have a daily practice where I dance, draw, and write. And it's one of my methodologies for my yeah, for my PhD research. And one day I was dancing with the pañuelo that would technically be the men's pañuelo, and I noticed that so those little flowers are called copihues or lapajarias, I think is how they're called in English, but they're the Chilean national flower, and they're red. And it provoked this memory of when I came to Canada. I was being taught English and I was being taught colors, and my English teacher handed me the color red to draw something. Maybe it was like a box or an apple or something. And I became really confused, and it was sort of dislocating or disorienting because in Chile, I had been taught that red was a different hue. So the red in Chile was a little bit more orangey in hue, and the red that I was being presented in my English lesson was a bit more pink. And so then I started to do this exploration where I returned to this memory. So I photocopied the pañuelo. I made various photocopies, and this isn't complete yet. I'm making 77, and I think I'm almost at 50. I think I'm at 49. I made a photocopy, and then I draw in the two versions of the red, which I sort of were inspired. So it was triggered by this. I was doing the practice, and this memory came, and then I noticed that in my crayon box, there were these two reds side by side because I had made like I had put all my crayons according to the spectrum, and I was like, that's it. Those are the two crayons. Those are the two reds. So this project is called Red and Rojo is the Spanish word for red, as a way to differentiate them. Actually, Amy, can you go back for a second? I think it might be easier to show the third one, please. Sorry, the fourth one, the third drawing. Yeah, thank you. So here you see, so this is chalk, this isn't crayon. And here you have the one on top is rojo, is the red that I came to understand or know in Chile. And the one below that is red, the red that I came to, be taught in Canada. So there was like a kind of a non-semantic translation that I had to do. And so this project, returns to this memory of being taught what red was. And it's sort of, the writing sort of swirls out from there. So I continuously try to bring myself back to that memory, but then the writing will sometimes be very much connected to that memory. And then other times, swirl out from there. So I think in one of the reflections, I talk about how I didn't just have to learn a new language. I had to learn new mannerisms. I also had to learn new ways of relating because Canadians didn't really hug or kiss each other on the cheek. They shook hands. I had to learn a different way of being. And this is reflective of a 1.5 generation immigrant where they're sort of in between two cultural horizons. You have the cultural horizon with which and 1.5 generation immigrants are usually the children of first generation immigrants. But because they don't have a choice in that immigration, their experience is a little bit different. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. So this project is trying to understand this in-betweenness, through these two colors and through these reflections that sort of emerge from the drawings. Again, it's very much connected to my daily practice of dancing, drawing, and writing, except for that in this case, I draw, I write, and then once I've made the 77 drawings, I'm going to try to see if I can use them as a score to create a dance. Or a performance or some movement at least, and see where that goes. But I haven't really thought that far. But in these reflections, what I have, there's a lot, like when my partner Nadine, when she reads them, she gets really sad because they're sort of like they're not sad to me. They're very honest, and I am very vulnerable in the reflections, and I don't mind sharing them at all. But for her, they're sad because she hasn't lived that experience. But for me, I've sort of kind of dealt with it, and this project has allowed me to deal or to work through this experience a little bit more. And what I found really fascinating when I went to the archives is that the exiles, and so the first archive that I encountered was the Latin American report, which were made by exiles from Edmonton. And in that, and in those reports, they were more like newspapers kind of things because they were written by an editorial team. There's a lot of discontent with the capitalism and consumerism in Canada. And also there's culture shock, I guess is the easiest way to say it, right? And so a lot of the things are very sad and they're nostalgic, but also they're critical of Canadian society in the 70s. And so it was really interesting to read that because I felt a lot of affinity towards what they were saying. And when I had been looking up, I think I don't have the book with me, unfortunately, but it's actually one, it's done by a performance studies scholar, and Sashar actually has a piece in that collection. There was another chapter that talked about 1.5 generation immigrants and how their experience is very much like an exile's experience. And when I first read that, I was like, oh, I was like, I do not feel that way. Like, I don't want to, like, that's a very different experience than mine. Like, I don't want to take that, like, I don't want to say that my experience is like theirs. But when I started reading what the exiles were saying, I was like, actually, it's very much true, except that I'm not fleeing, but neither a 1.5 generation immigrant nor an exile has a choice in their leaving the country. And so there's a huge disruption to chronological arc that happens for 1.5 generation immigrants and exiles because they have a future in their home country, and that gets disrupted. And so now they have to begin from a different place. Whereas people who choose to immigrate, that immigration is part of their trajectory. That's a choice that they have made. And so there isn't this disconnection or disturbance that occurs.
So a 1.5 generation immigrant would be someone who immigrated as a child.
That's
right?
right.
So you've grown up to a certain degree in a certain tradition, and then your parents said, hey, we're moving, and you, of course, as a child, have no say in that move. You just go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in the project with the archives, I've been trying to, like I said, like locate where cueca might have been danced, might have been performed. And that has been really hard. The churches keep coming up, as well as I think there was churches, there were gatherings at Harborfront Center during like a Children's Day thing, which the cueca may have been danced there. There's also these Chilean resistance sort of gatherings during which the cueca may have been danced. Yeah, like that one, for example. This is actually one from Vancouver at the Ukrainian Hall on East Pender. And so I'm actually creating a little map with all of these things from what I can find in the archives, just because I'm really interested to see, where they were kind of gathering and where what they were advertising. And so a lot of these are ads that appear in the bulletins. And so I had to be very careful with how I searched through the bulletins, because the ad might be quite big or it might be quite small. And I needed to know, I needed to just pay attention. And so I find that this is really fascinating. This, like, where does dance get relegated to with regards to communities, and how does it get promoted? And, I think that Karen talked about how, like, with the powwow, it gets put in newspapers or on social media, right? But these bulletins is all that the archives have. And I wondered, I wonder if, they were being advertised in like at the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail, but I haven't gone through those things yet. And I don't know if I want to, because I kind of want to create a little bit of a sampling for myself. This isn't my full research, but this is helping me understand, or the question that has arisen from this one project in the archives is, what dance forms does Toronto promote or foster, and which ones are fostered less, and where are they performed? And so community dance forms are not often staged, or if they are, it tends to be during a Heritage Day, for example. And you see that in, I don't have it here, unfortunately, but in the Edmonton bulletin, or like a newspaper, there was a Heritage Day, and there were dances from Chile that were going to be performed. And what else do I want to say about that? What I found really interesting in the Edmonton one, and I haven't finished that archive yet, was that, and Amy, you can click on the last, not the very last one, but the second to last row, the very last image, please. That there was this group in Edmonton that feels or sounds very much like Shumka. Am I saying?
Yeah, Shumka. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was this Chilean folk dance and music group. It's kind of at the top on the left-hand column. And it was made up of professionals that would gather later on, and they would create dance forms for the resistance, or about the dictatorship, or to promote the Chilean resistance. And if you scroll down, these you will see that you have this image here. They're all in black, fists up, or making these kind of gestures, like I'm taking a stance, I'm creating a wall. And if you go further down, I don't know if you can there's another page to this.
Oh, yes. Okay. So this is a PDF. So there's a good way to point this out in DCD Discover. If you have a PDF, you can click on it, and then you have access to the whole document as soon as it opens there.
Excellent.
Yeah. So yeah, now we can see page 2.
Great. And then so here you have another image of them doing, if you scroll down a little bit more, black, doing a very different type of gesture. But it's the very last image that actually really surprised me. This one, because it didn't look folk. Right. And even the title is called The Meaning of Folk Ballet. And so there's a contemporary aspect to the Chilean, to the dancing that Chileans were doing in Edmonton. And this to me looks very Graham-esque. I have no idea if that's what it's trying to convey, because the writing doesn't say anything about the images. But I found this image really fascinating, as well as the other ones, because they're not traditional postures. Postures of resistance are not traditional to cueca, although that's not to say that somebody might not take them up. And in fact, there was another solitary cueca performed by a queer collective in Chile, the Mares of the Apocalypse, or Las Yeguas del Apocalipsis, that took up La Cueca Sola in the 90s, and they danced it. So it's 2 guys dancing on a map of South America with broken Coke bottles, and they were dancing with bare feet. So as they went around, their feet were being cut and blood was sort of being spread. And part of that critique was about American imperialism. So again, the cueca sola, or the solitary cueca, was taken up in a different way by this queer collective and presented or utilized to critique something different, right? So I don't know if these images are presenting cueca or modern Chilean dancing. And I think that's really fascinating, because I think that when we think about immigrants and the dance forms that they bring, we might automatically assume that they're bringing traditional dance or folk dances, but we don't. Maybe it hasn't reached the imaginary, or maybe it didn't reach my imaginary, that they could be also creating contemporary dance forms that are outside of their tradition, or that are fusions or inspired by other dance forms. And there was some influence from German modern dance in Chile because of that connection between Germany that Chile has. There are a lot of Germans came there after the war, both as either fleeing what was happening, or unfortunately, like Nazis also came to Chile to resettle. So there is influence there as well. So we don't. It was really interesting for me to see this, because it made me realize that Chileans are not just bringing their traditions; they're also bringing their modernity with them, and it can manifest in different ways. And in this case, it's manifests as dancing. So I found that really cool. I haven't found that yet for Toronto. I've only found the traditional, folk music, folk dance. But even that is a broad category, and I don't know what is meant by that, aside from the fact that, from my understanding of what they consider folk, right? And I feel like how we might consider folk here in North America is very different than how we might consider folk practices in Latin America and the Caribbean, meaning that those folk practices are also very contemporary and may follow tradition, but may also be used to disrupt tradition as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Are there any other particular images that you want to expand on of what you shared here?
Yeah, can I talk about the last row, the one on the left? I think this is a very good example of why archives are important. So here's a shout out to the archives, dance and otherwise. So this is a poster for a peña, or a festivity for the Chilean resistance. As you can see, there's a mark, an X, right?
Mm-hmm.
So actually what was being archived was something that was glued to the other side of this page. So I was going through these miscellaneous, folder, and I was going through, because it was all about culture, and there was something about, something on the other side of this page, but I turn it over and I see this, and I thought, well, this is interesting, because you've just taken this page and said, don't look here, look on the other side. But me as a dance scholar, I'm interested in this other side, actually, right? So I digitized this, and I actually didn't digitize the other side, because I was sort of like, I'm not I kind of was doing an eye for an eye kind of situation, and I shouldn't have, but because now I don't know what was on the other side. But it's really interesting how, what people find important, or important to archive in a collection, right? So they didn't think that this was important, but for me, a dance scholar, this is super important.
Yeah.
And so it made me think about, like, what else is at CERLAC that I haven't seen, because the box that I've been given has to do with the exiles, and this folder was particularly about cultural, like the culture, or miscellaneous culture, like I think it was something labeled something like that. And so dance doesn't really appear, right? Dance is not a category that somebody could call up immediately if you go to CERLAC. It would be under, like culture. That was a very broad category. Otherwise, you have to kind of just like look through and see what you can find. So this was one of the first things that I found. It was a Chilean resistance and folk music, festival or party, I guess would be a better translation, at St. Peter's Church on Bloor and Bathurst. And I thought that was really interesting. And so again, I've been having to be very careful with how I go through these archives, and I can't skim as much as I would like to. So it's taking me a while to get through half a banker's box.
Yeah.
Because there's so much material.
Plus, you're also, like, from something like this, you're getting an indication of an event happening, but finding the matching media coverage of the event must be incredibly challenging, because this isn't something that would be in the mainstream media. You'd have to find probably community papers, maybe Spanish
Exactly.
language papers, for example, that would actually describe what happened at the event. Whereas in so much of, for example, ballet and modern dance research, if we find an ad, then we can usually find an accompanying preview or review piece that tells us what happened, right? So I can imagine that your particular area of research is even more challenging because of that, of finding the ads is one thing, but actually finding out what happened at the event is a whole other challenge.
Absolutely. And I actually haven't taken up that challenge yet, because I've been meaning to go to the First Unitarian Church to see if they have more information. I do know that, so there was this interchurch committee for Chile that, have their own archives. And I know those are located at Regent Park. And I also haven't gone through those. So there might be more information there, but you're absolutely right. I have no idea what the program was like. I have pictures are very minimal. I have found a few, and they are in this collection that you uploaded, Amy. But other than that, there's not much to say. For example, on the second row, third from the left, there's a picture here of two Toronto folk groups. The Chilean folk group of Toronto in performance at Parkdale Library, and then the one below that is the folk group Victor Jara. Victor Jara is the musician that I was talking about earlier, of the Toronto Chilean Association. So it's kind of like following the breadcrumbs, which I kind of like. And I have given myself a year to do this research as a way to kind of delimit how much I take in, because it's also really hard to take in these stories of exile. Oftentimes, these bulletins have a lot of details about the torture that's happening in Chile. And so it's been a lot for my body, and I'm very sensitive in the sense that I'm deeply affected by these stories. So I've given myself a year to see what I can find. But following the breadcrumbs has been really fascinating, and seeing where things might be. And again, it just talks about the secondary dispersal of this community, right, where nothing is concentrated in one place. It exists across, various cities. And I think that's another added layer to the immigration experience, is that unless you have somebody diligently working with a community or a diasporic community, things are going to be all over the place, which makes it interesting but challenging for research, and interesting and also challenging for it to reach mainstream media, because you don't have that connection, that deep connection that other dance forms or other communities might have with the media. I will talk about one last thing, because I know we're at a time. It's the very last image of the couple dancing cueca, and this was the very first instance of my encounter of cueca in the archives. And this is kind of like what the couple looks like. This is the Huaso on the left with his pañuelo, and the China, which is the woman dancer, on the right. I believe they're silhouetted. I don't think they're meant to be Black people, but I don't know. It doesn't say in the writing, but what I found interesting in the reflection, so this piece is a reflection of this person going to an event and witnessing a cueca, or many cuecas actually, because the last one was a battle between farmers and the businessmen, and they were doing this cueca battle essentially, or something that was and I don't know how else to explain it. I think it's kind of like the farmers would dance a cueca, and then the businessmen would dance a cueca. And I've seen this done in Chile for the bicentennial, where you have two different groups and they kind of dance for and against each other.
Sort of
And
like a dance off.
A dance off. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. But with cueca elements. And so at the very end, the person writing this piece, at the very end of the piece, they kind of come together and they dance it together. And at the end of the reflection, the person is left feeling like there was something awkward there. And they talk about how they believe that that would never happen, that farmers and businessmen or like the elite would never dance a cueca together because of their class differences, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I feel so something, because there's something about how this person has grown up watching cueca that has provoked them to say these words. And so there is a class aspect, there's a gender aspect to cueca, there's definitely a class aspect to cueca, and there's more, right? Like I said, cueca is known as a mestizo dance form, which means that it's a mixed dance form, and it has elements of Spanish, Andalusian dance, as well as indigenous and Africanist influence. And the mestizo narrative was really used by Pinochet as a way to kind of like disconnect from the European or the Spanish, colonizing that occurred, and sort of create a new story or history for Chile. And so that this person can't imagine a cueca differently, or a cueca between farmers and businessmen, is super fascinating. And it's these alter cuecas, as I call them, these cuecas that are not traditional, that are not mainstream to Chilean culture, that really illuminate, what it is that a cueca does for the Chilean community, and what it is that is held as traditional and as a norm within cueca. And I think I'll leave it there.
Right. Absolutely fascinating, Sebastian. I just to finish off, I believe you once told me that when you were growing up in Chile, dance was a much bigger part of your life than when you moved to Canada. So did you actually learn the cueca when you were growing up?
That's a really good question. And I thought that I had, because you get taught it at school, and I may have learned elements of it, but I'm actually not 100% sure. That's not actually in my memory at the moment. But I have cousins visiting right now, and we've been talking about this, and they have been taught cueca, but more to get it like as a grade, like they have to learn it to pass, like phys ed, for example, much like how I had to learn square dancing and line dancing in elementary school to, as a module in PE. But they are not really, and they're not really, it's not fostered for them to learn the cueca as a part of their identity. And that I totally respect that. And people have their own identities and stuff like that. But it is, I know that right now, and this may have happened to me back then, that it is taught at school in a very theoretical way. And they're not forced to dance it, or if they are, it's like to pass their grade. So one of the things that my cousins don't like is that they have to dance it with another, not a friend, but like a classmate, and everybody has to watch. And so that's how they pass. So they don't like it because they're being forced to do this in front of a group, and it's not arising out of a social interaction. It's being forced and imposed on them.
Right.
But
Which totally takes away the folk aspect.
Absolutely.
Right? The folk aspect is supposed to be social. It's not supposed to be a presentation.
Exactly. But with my family, yes, there was a lot of dancing at family gatherings. And that's one of the things that I really missed when I moved to Canada, because I didn't have my extended family here. And that's when I would dance. So it was very much part of my upbringing. For those first 8 years of my life.
Right. And so just so that I have the timeline straight, the coup was in 1973. Is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay. And now I know you're younger than me, but so you basically grew up in the Pinochet era then. You would have been born after the coup.
That's right. Because it came to an end in 1990. That's when the new president was elected.
Right. So in that time growing up, that would have been over the period where Pinochet had sort of dubbed it the national dance. So it would make
Absolutely.
sense that it would, that would be taught in the school system, right? That it's sort of like learning, you learn the national anthem, you learn the national dance, right? It's all part of these aspects of good citizenry, right? To know these things.
Yeah, exactly. So you just provoked a thing. I'll just say it very quickly. I am doing an autoethnography because of the pandemic, and I kind of I wanted to just take it into my body and see what came out. But one of the things that I was interested in was the relationship that exiles would have had with the dance form versus the relationship that Chileans who stayed in Chile would have had with the dance form, because the exiles left before it was nationalized. So
Right.
for them, it would have a very different meaning than
Mhm.
those that stayed in the country. And I think that more contemporary dance forms have emerged from the country than probably from those who, in the diaspora, because they held to their traditions in a way. But I
Mhm.
don't know that. These are just inklings that I have. And I think that if I was to continue this research, I would definitely want to see that kind of comparison, like how the lineage of cueca may have branched out according to these two communities, let's say, the diaspora and those who stayed behind.
Right, right. Wow, really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this research with us. I'm just going to put in the chat. Hang on, now we make it go
And
to.
thank you everybody for coming. It's been really nice to talk to an audience.
Yeah. So I've put a link directly to that collection of images. And I've noticed that with Zoom, you can't copy and paste the link. So I suggest you click on it right now and let it open your browser, and then you can just have it open and you can go back to it later and explore the research that Sebastian has uncovered so far. So thank you very much, Sebastian. That was really interesting, as I knew it would be. And I always love our discussions in dance. And thank you everybody for coming out today and attending, and stay tuned. We'll be doing another DCD Discover Dialogues in September, where we will be talking about 15 Dance Lab. And that, of course, involves our DCD co-founder, Miriam Adams, who will be present and talking about that really important activity that was happening in Toronto in the 1970s. So thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you at the next DCD Discover Dialogues.